Well, the Andrews government has promised to build 800,000 new homes over the next decade to address Victoria's housing crisis. For more, we're joined by Jess Wilson, Shadow Housing Minister. Good afternoon to you, Jess. Now, this has been a big plan that's been announced by the government today. First of all, what's your reaction?
Well, we've seen today a big shiny target being put out by the Andrews government, 80,000 homes each year. But our concerns are, how is that going to be achieved when we've seen a residential construction crisis recently? We've seen the collapse of major home builders like Porter Davis. How are we simply going to build the homes? A home won't build itself, so we need to make sure we've actually got the construction sector capable of building these homes. We've also got concerns that another tax has been introduced, an Airbnb tax, a tourism tax that is going to make it harder for people to go on holiday. And it's going to hit our regions at the hardest possible time. We've seen tourism falling away in regional Victoria, and now we've seen another tax announced by the Andrews government, which will do nothing to actually increase housing supply.
I wanted to get to that a little bit in a moment, but in terms of that big lofty goal, that's about 200 homes being built a day. Have you had any feedback from industry, and is that a feasible target?
Well, as I said, what we're concerned about is a home won't build itself. We need the residential construction sector in particular, the construction sector more broadly, being able to deliver those new homes, whether they're houses, whether they're apartments or whether they're townhouses. And what we've heard from industry is the government here is looking at scale. They're looking at how can they bring these new homes at scale. But not every Victorian is going to want to live in an apartment, for example. They're going to want to look at a house. So we've got big targets, but we don't understand where they're going to be built and how they're going to be built. We put forward some parameters to the government in recent weeks about how do we increase the supply of housing. The lack of housing supply is driving our affordability issues in this state. And as part of that, we talked about working with local councils to put in targets at each local government area, working with the local community. And that's another big concern today. We've heard from the Andrews government that they plan to strip the voices of local residents from any decisions when it comes to planning in their local area.
I wanted to ask you about that. Council planning looks like they're going to have their powers watered down. The argument is that it's going to speed up development to get it there. Do you think that will happen? I'm
very concerned about centralising decision making when it comes to planning. What I hear from councils regularly is that when decisions around planning get called in to the minister's desk, they end up sitting there for much longer than that would have other sat with council. We've also heard today that council has approved around 120,000 permits, plans to build new homes. And the reason those new homes aren't being built is because we simply do not have the capacity in the construction sector to do that. And that's because of supplies and labour being pulled into the government's big build projects and it not being available in the private market to deliver those new homes. So we need to strike a right balance. Of course, we need to make sure that planning is moving faster, that we've put in some sensible reforms around removing that red tape, looking at how we can work with local councils to resource them better, particularly in regional Victoria. But we can't have a situation where local residents no longer have any voice in their own community.
You do acknowledge, though, that will speed up the process, though?
Oh, look, we're going to look at the detail. We're not convinced that these reforms announced today will speed up the process. We think centralising it could only result in it sitting for longer and longer, and also politicising decision-making if it's sitting on a minister's desk. We want to understand how the planning department will be resourced up. And all of those reforms coming together, as I said, we actually need to make sure we can actually deliver these new homes in terms of construction.
A new tax was also announced today on short-term accommodation. Will that increase the supply of long-term rentals, do you think?
Absolutely not. And the Premier, by his own admission, has said that this new tax, a tax on tourism and holidays, a tax on short-stay properties in regional Victoria in particular, will not result in those properties going onto the long-term rental market. We certainly have a rental crisis here in Victoria. We see the supply of rental properties falling away, and over the past 12 months we've seen 25% of property owners decide to put their investment properties on the market. They are not being bought by new property investors, they're going to owner-occupiers, which is only fuelling our rental crisis. This new tax, it's a tax that will do nothing to increase housing supply. It's 7.5%. It's going to cost Victorians who want to go on holidays. And it's going to go into Homes Victoria. Now, Homes Victoria is looking at building more social housing, but Over the past two terms, decade nearly, we've seen the number of new homes only increase by less than 500 social houses, and we've also seen that waitlist double under the Andrews government. So this is a crisis of the government's own making, and what we want to see is them looking at how do they increase the supply of housing, not tax Victorians who want to go on holiday.
The government says they're going to get developers in to build these new homes with that 10% affordable housing and boost that supply. Arguably, the developers will be footing a major part of this bill, but we still don't really have a number on how much this package will cost. Do you have any idea about what it might look like?
Well, what we're concerned about when it comes to that 10% affordable or social housing for developers is there is also an option that developers will have to pay that upfront to the government and pay that levy. That's only going to flow through to make housing less affordable for Victorians. It's going to make housing less affordable right across the board. And one thing that really concerned me today when I was looking at this package from the government and looking through their documentation, they only mention home ownership once in this document. Now, a plan for increasing housing supply in Victoria only mentions home ownership once. We want to see more Victorians being able to own their own home. We know it's getting harder and harder for young Victorians in particular to actually save and put together a deposit and be able to purchase their own home. This package today does nothing to help that aspiring young Victorian family or young Victorian who's trying to work very hard to save for that deposit get any closer to realising their dream. Just
finally for us, Jess Wilson, more protection for tenants against rental hikes. Surely that's welcome news.
Look, what we're concerned about here is anything that puts rental controls or rental caps in place. Now, the government statement itself says that rental controls are very, very, very risky when it comes to supply. We've seen that right around the world, and we don't want to see a band-aid solution when it comes to essentially putting in place any controls that is going to see further reduction of supply in the rental market. There are some interesting proposals there that we'll look at in detail around portable bonds. We think that could be a sensible reform, and also looking at issues when it comes to underquoting in the market. And as someone who has been to many, many auctions and you go there and you think it's going to be a certain price range and it's not, I think that is something we should look at.
All right, it's been a big day, a lot to cover. Jess Wilson, thank you very much for your time.
Thanks so much, Dougal.
And we did invite the government on, but a spokesperson was unavailable.